Hello all, and welcome to the second of 8 webinars offered by MarkupUK this June. Some administrative stuff first. Last time around, in case you missed that, we recorded the webinar and it's available from our website at markupuk.org. For those of you who were there, we also promised a chat, the chat made available to you after. That didn't go really well. It's not available and never will be because, well, apparently nobody understood how to actually save that thing. So we've actually turned that off, and we'd really like you to ask your questions in the questions and answers window. They will either be answered by my co-host during the talk or by Eric afterwards. Or if it's a really long question, it might be that he'd like to answer it properly in the very last webinar session this June, which is an XProc Q&A. And if you haven't registered for that one, you really should. And of course, we are recording this webinar as well. So with all that out of the way, let me introduce today's speaker. Eric Siegel is a content engineer, an XML specialist, living and working in the Netherlands. He does a lot of XSTV consulting, a lot of XProc consulting, obviously. He does a lot of training. And with all that, Eric, please take it away.
All right, everybody, welcome back, or at least I hope everybody's back. I'm now going to share my screen. Right, you should now see the fish. The first thing I would like to say to you is that when you have cloned the repository I made for this set of presentations, please pull it again from GitHub, or reclone it from GitHub, or do a git pull origin master, whatever you want to do, because I've changed a few things. What I also did is I added a Q&A file to the repository, so you can and in that I answered a few of the questions that were there last time. So with that out of the way, let's quickly get started. Why does it work? Yes. All right. Let's first quickly go over what we did and learned in part 1. We talked about what XProc is. XProc is a pipeline language for documents, and it chains steps. Documents that flow in and out of steps, and they flow in and out of steps through ports. And ports are pretty important. You need to understand ports. You have documents, and they can be XML, HTML, text, JSON, or even binary. One input and one output port of a step can be primary, and that's important because these ports implicitly connect unless you explicitly override that. So if you put two steps next to each other in the pipeline, you don't have to create any port connections. XProc will do that for you. If you don't want that, or you have non-primary ports, you can connect the port to another port in the pipeline, to a document on disk, or a document on the web or whatever, or to a document stated in line in the pipeline itself. And there are also options. Options are additional switches for steps and your pipelines. So what are we going to do today? I would like to, sorry for that. I would like to revisit options, because you can also set options using P with optioned, and there is a gotcha there. There's something that will likely go wrong if you're not aware of it. So I want to talk about that. Then I want to talk shortly about variables, how you create them, how you use them. And it's not only that variables are very useful, but also the things I can tell you about setting variables that are useful. And then I would like to show the core or the compound steps. I think these are the steps that really make your pipeline sing and dance. You can do looping, you can do decisions, and stuff like that. So I'm going to talk about what core steps there are and introduce some of them to you. Not all, there's not enough time for that. So let's do some revisiting of options. We've already seen options last in the first part of this 101. What you can do to set an option is you can put the option as an attribute on your steps invocation. We've seen that for the add attribute, you had a match option, you had an attribute name option, attribute value option. And you can declare your own options for your own step, as I did in one of the last examples I handled. With a P option element, you can say, okay, my step has this option. Let's go over the mechanisms how you can provide values for options. And of course, you've seen some of them. The first way to set option values is what we've already seen. You can use attributes. And within these attributes, you can use attribute value templates. These are things between curly braces to insert XPath expressions. And you probably know that from XSLT. There are, however, a number of limitations to setting options this way. It will only work for simple atomic values, like strings, integer, booleans, etc. It will only work for single values, so you can't set an option to a sequence of strings, for instance. You can't do that. It will always be a single string. And this is not a limitation. Actually, as soon as an option is of type map or of type array, you can put the XPath declaration of this map and array literally in the option in the attributes value, as you can see in the yellow example at the bottom of this sheet. So that's easy. That's a nice syntactic sugar thing of XProc 3. So this is first way to set an option value. There's also a second way to do that, and that is using P with option. As you can see here, you can use a P with option statement as a child of your step, with which you can set the options. And so let's quickly see whether that actually works. Here is the code of example 1. This is the same thing we did in the first 101 session, but now I set the options using P with option. And when I run that, no surprise, the result is exactly the same as we've seen last time. So there is a gotcha here, and we need to talk about it, unfortunately. Let's have a look at the match attribute. If you might have noticed that in the attribute case, it was unquoted, it's just match is /star. But as soon as the P with option is there, you use P with option, the value is quoted. It's a select and then /star within single quotes. And why is that? That is because if you look at the P at attribute definition, you'll see that the match attribute is of type string. I can even show you that. Here, and we go to add attribute. And what you see here is that the match option is of type string. So it expects a string, and it actually expects a string, and we added here a selection pattern. So this means that the selection pattern is handled by the step itself, and it should not be handled by the surrounding pipeline. An attribute value is just an atomic value with attribute value templates expanded, but a select attribute is an XPath expression which will be executed by the XProc pipeline, and the value of this expression will be passed to the step. So let's quickly have a look at what can go wrong if you do this wrong, because that's probably enlightening. Sorry. As the title of the sheet says, don't try this at home because it will will result in an error, as we will show. Here is a match attribute where I deliberately left out the quotes, which means that /star will be executed against the connection of p@, attribute, the implicit connection, which is the document that flows in. The string value of that is the string value of the text in the XML file, which means that the value of the match attribute is this string value, which is not a valid XPath expression, and the result is an error. So let me demonstrate that, because that's of course the way to do this. Oh, and as you can see, here we have an error, and it says error in match XPath expression, blah, blah, blah. It cannot make anything. This is not a valid XPath expression, so your pipeline will fail. So remember, things that look match expressions and some other options match options and other options will need a string value, and don't forget to add the quotes if you use p with option. Let's have a look at some use cases for p with option. One of the things where you do need with option and cannot use attributes is when you pass something more complex than a single atomic value. For instance, there is a step called p-directory list that, no surprise, creates a directory list, and it has an include filter option, which is a sequence of strings. Now, if you want to pass more than one string to this option, you need to use p with option. There is also an example there. I'm not going to run it, but you can run it for yourself if you want to. Another use case for using p with option is when you want to process your XPath expression against something floating out of another port. So let's assume that somewhere else in your pipeline you have a document with a status attribute on the root, and you want to catch that value, you want to pass that value to an option. Then you have to connect your with option statement to a port of another step, and you can do that by saying, okay, I want the status attribute of the root, and please use this document to get it, the document flowing out of this port of this step to get it. And as the fish says, this might be a bit complicated, but don't worry, most of the time setting your options will be simple. But if you ever need something more complex, here it is. Right. Let's get to a new subject, which is variables. XProc 1 had variables. There were some limitations on that. XProc 3 has variables like you're probably used to in XSLT. For instance, you declare a variable with p variable, name is ID, and a select statement to set its value. And you can use a variable with using the same name with a $, in front, like in XSLT. There, you can also type a variable. You can use an S attribute. I'm not going to show that here for brevity, but you can use name is ID as XS string, for instance, if you want to. Let's have a look at the example that is there. Of an example of using a variable. What I did here, I created a pipeline with an option called username, and what I want to do now is create an ID based on the value of that username. So what I do is I do uppercase of that, I select uppercase that string, and I concatenate it with something that might surprise you. Hey, that's an XPath function you don't know. No, that's true. As an aside, I would like to introduce XProc functions to you. XProc has a number of extension functions that you can use only within the pipeline, but provide interesting things to you. And you can look them up in the specification. For instance, if you look at then you have to go to the core specification to paragraph 8, XPath extension functions. And for instance, you will find there the function I just introduced to you, p system property. P system property gives you system properties of your XProc pipeline. And for instance, it can return an XProc system property called episode, which returns a string that should be unique for each invocation of the pipeline processor. And there are also other things you can find: product name, version, vendor, stuff like that. There's a function like that in XSLT as well. So let's try to run that. Let's try to run this thing. See what happens. No, run later. And as you can see, the ID I just was added as an attribute to some input file, and here you see the uppercase of the username and some episode number. Totally uninteresting in itself, but it proves as a nice example of how to set a variable and that there are system properties you can use. Another thing you can do is you can fill variables with values coming from the document that is flowing through. For instance, I have a document flowing through with a user attribute. The user is called Eric, and that's me. And instead of using an option, I want to read the name of this attribute and use it to provide a value for my variable. Okay, so how does that work? So in this case, you have your input port, and what comes in here flows through this variable declaration. And here I can simply say /*/user at user to get the value of the user attribute, which is easy. So you can just pick values from the document that is flowing through. And the result will be the same, so I won't run it. So you can get values from your document. Another thing is you can get values from another document, from an additional document, another document on disk. Let's have a look at this example 2C. In this case, what I say, I want a variable, and in this, there is a document that's called status.xml, and I'll show you. It just says status is normal, which is always nice. And it reads from status XML the value of the status attribute in this document. So what it does, it adds an attribute and it says, okay, I add status copied to the attribute name status copied, and I put in the value that I just read from this other document. So just let's have a look whether that works. As you can see, there is now a status copied attribute with the value normal, which it got from this external document. All right, to the slides. This is what I want to say about variables. As a brief introduction. Let's get to the last subject of this 101 course, which are the core or the compound steps. These steps, as I said, make your pipeline sing and dance. You can make decisions, you can loop, you can do error handling, etc., etc. For each, I'm going to talk about pchoose not, but you can probably guess what it does. Pif is like a pchoose without a p otherwise. There's an XSLT version of an if as well. It looks like that. As a viewport, we're going to handle that. Ptry, pcatch is for error handling, and pgroup is for grouping instructions. Pgroup is probably a bit obsolete. It was absolutely necessary in XProc 1. It's no longer that necessary in XProc 3, but it's still there, and in some situations it's just convenient to use it. So let's have a look of an application of pay for each. And it works like this. We have an input document which looks like this. It has two child elements under the root with a file name attribute. So what I want to process this input document, push it through the pipeline, have all doc elements. Incredible. Sorry for that. And push it through the pipeline and create the output files and then produce some kind of result. Okay, let's have a look how what that looks like in code. Here is 3a, and as you can see here, it will not run, and I will tell you why in a few moments. It has this input document, which is here, as we already saw on the sheet. I just put in for fun a variable with the name of the output directory. I do a p for each, and a p for each actually loops over all the documents that come in. And on top of that, you can loop over the contents of a document, is what I'm doing here. So what actually happens here, the p for each will take the document that comes in, takes the /star/doc elements, make them into a new document, and this is the current document inside the pay for each. Now, then I'll just do a pstore. A pstore is a step which just stores what flow through on a given path, which you can provide with the href option. And in this case, I'm created by using the output variable and the value of the file name attribute of the doc element here. So this creates the path. pstore has this quite nice thing that it stores the document but doesn't do anything to the document. So the document flows through the pstore without being altered. We've bickered in the XProc group whether it should be called pt, but we decided to stay on pstore. It's like a t command in Unix. So let's run it and see where things go wrong. All right, what does it say? It says more than one document found on the result port. Right, and that's of course true because the for each creates loops over this, creates two documents, and they flow out at the bottom of this pay for each, flow out of the output port, and the output port is defined as a non-sequence port. We'll soon see how you can define it as a sequence port, which means it will only expect one document and then it will fail. So how can we amend this? Well, in several ways. This is the first way to amend it. You can tell your output port to accept sequences of documents, more than one document. And if you do that, and if you run that, then you can see that you get two output documents out of it. There are two doc elements here. Of course, the output, as it is printed here on the standard out of Margana, is no longer a valid, well-formed XML document because it has two root elements. But this is how it works. Another thing you might do is, for instance, add a pcount step at the end. Pcount simply counts the number of documents that flow in. So it should now return a 2. So let's have a look at that. And here it is. It says the pcount just returns a result element and with the contents of 2. So it counted the number of documents out of it. And in case you think, and are these output 1 and output 2 documents actually created? Well, yes, they are here. So here you have output 1 and here you have output 2. Very non-exciting files, but they're created by the pipeline. So what more can we do here? Another interesting thing we can do is, let's assume, here we are. Let's assume we want to know the resulting file names because, well, this case is simple, but sometimes your computation of your file name is complex and you want to know what the file name is that is actually the result is written to. In that case, we need to have a closer look at the pstore step. The pstore step, let's have a look at that. Standard step library. And have a look at pstore there. And as we can see, pstore has an additional output port. It's called result URI. And what comes out of the result URI port is a single XML element with as contents the URI where the document is written. And we would like to catch that. We're not interested in the documents themselves. We're interested in the URIs for this example. So how can we do that? Let's have a look at the code. All right, what have we done? The first thing is we gave the pstore a name. In this case, the name is store the document. And then we have given the for each an explicit output port. It now no longer outputs what flows out of the pstore. It outputs what we actually throw into this output port. And what we say in this output port, please take whatever the result URI output port of the store the document step was. So here comes out the result document, becomes part of this output, and then comes out at the bottom. And because what comes out now is a sequence of documents, and we want to see them, we don't want to count them, we want to see them, we're going to wrap them, we do the wrap sequence and wrap it in the result URI's element. So let's run that. Here we are, we can see we have a result URI's element, and within that two see result elements of which the content is the URI to which the file is written, which is sometimes very useful. We've now used P for each. There's another way to do it. There are of course there's more than one way to do it, and that provides me with a good way to introduce the P viewport core step to you. P viewport does something interesting. What it does, it looks at your XML files with a match expression, and the element that is matched with the match expression becomes the input to what's inside the P viewport, and the output of that subpipeline will replace the element matched. So how can we use that to create to create the same result as we did last time? Here we are. Instead of a P for each, we now write a viewport, and we match this thing on /star/doc as we did. We again create an anonymous output port in which we put the result URI, what comes out of the result URI port of the pstore. And here's the pstore again. So what happens now is that /star/doc is replaced by what is actually comes out of this P output. So we don't have to wrap it. What comes out here is just a single document with just the /star/doc elements replaced by the result URI documents. Now, does that actually work? Let's see. As you can see, we still have the documents root element because that wasn't matched by P viewport, but both the children of the documents root element, the doc elements, are replaced by the C result documents here. So that's actually what we want. Now, to take it one step further, and that's the last step for today, is what if we have an enabled attribute on our doc elements? And actually we have that, I will show you in a minute. Then we need to make a decision. The enabled doc elements should be written to file, and the non-enabled should not be written to file. So how does that work? Let's have a look at the last example. First, let me quickly show you the input. As you can see, there is an enabled is true on the first doc, and there is there's no enabled attribute on the second doc. And let's assume the default variable for enabled is false. So we only want the first doc written. So how does it work? Again, we have a viewport /there/doc. But inside the viewport, we do a pif. And what pif does, in pif you can give a test attribute, and you can say, okay, please look at the enabled attribute of the doc element that's in there. And if that thing is true, then do the output trick. Interesting is, of course, what happens when it's false. In that case, pif acts like a pass-through. It just doesn't do anything. It just passes the document that comes in directly to the output without altering it. So what we should expect is that we should see a result URI element for the first document because that was enabled. And we see the original doc element for the second element because it had no enabled attribute on it. Whoa, let's have a look whether that's actually true. As you can see, the first document was written because there's a see result element here, and the second document was not written and it's unaltered and it's still in the output of the pipeline. Okay, so this is actually the last example I want to show you. So as a wrap up, what did we learn today? You can set options in two ways. You can do it by attribute, and you can use p with option elements. And p with option elements you sometimes have to use when things get more complicated than just a single value. Always watch out who is going to interpret the XPath expressions. Is it the step or is it the pipeline? And make sure you don't make mistakes with that. You can define and you can use variables in an XProc pipeline. You can set them using an XPath expression, and this XPath expression does not have to be based on the document flowing through. You can base it on an external document or even a document coming out of another port. And there are core steps, very important for looping, decision making, etc. And we looked at 3 of them. We looked at pay for each, p viewport, and pif. All right, that's it for now. I thank you very much for listening. The next XProc webinar is June 16. It will be given by my colleague Akin Bernsen, and he will tell you on how to process JSON in XProc, which is now possible. It wasn't in 1.0, but it's possible now in 3.0. And let me pass control back to the organizers.
Thank you, Eric. Thank you very much for that. We do have a question from Mark Dunn. So Mark, I am going to allow you to talk. So you should be able to ask your question now, please.
Thanks. Yeah, can you hear me?
Yeah,
yes.
I can hear you, Mark. Yeah.
Great. So just looking through the examples today and in the previous session on Thursday, I struggled to see the difference between some of the things you were putting in as on input ports, some of the things you were putting in as options, and today you had an example of a variable where you pulled in something from a separate file.
Yeah.
They all seem to sort of overlap in what they do. Is there a best practice on which of those features you should use for which kind of scenario?
Do you have an XSLT background, by the way?
Yes.
Yes, well, options are like global parameters in XSLT style sheets. You use them to set things like debug on or off or output directories or stuff like that. Things that flow through ports are documents, the documents you want to change. Like the document, like the global document that flows through an XSLT style sheet. I think that's the main thing I can say about it. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, it's on the, I think so. Can I ask about this sort of secondary ports? So I think my main confusion was about, so yes, I can see you've got your primary port, which is your primary documents, and then you had an example last week of a secondary port in which there was another document, and you took information from the second document.
Yeah.
And today you're showing a variable which takes information from a second document. They seem to produce the same effect.
Well, they do. There is of course overlap, and it all depends on the functionality you're trying to implement. I mean, if you have an important document that is created by some other process and you want to pull some information from it, just read it in through a port and set some variables with values from that document.
Sure. Yeah, I'm not a practitioner of XProc yet,
no.
So I'm just thinking about it in the abstract.
But there is overlap, no doubt. I mean, there are things you can accomplish in multiple ways. Yes, but that's the same as XSLT parameters.
Sure. Okay. Yeah. Thank you.
Okay.
Right. Thanks, Mark. There is another question from Eamon Naylan. I'm going to allow you to talk.
Hello. Hi there.
Hello, Eamon.
Hello. So familiar with Calabash, and it's good to discover more Ghana. I wouldn't classify myself as an XProc adept at all, but just wondering what other tools support there is more for constructing the pipelines than for executing them.
There are no, at this moment, there are no specific tools for constructing a pipeline besides a good XML editor. And then you still have to type it yourself. If you use one like Oxygen, you can set the schema, so it helps you with creating your pipeline. But beside that, there is nothing else.
Sounds like a good project.
Yeah, it sounds like Oxygen should implement, like they did for XProc 1, they should implement XProc 3 as well. Yeah.
Thank you.
I am told that Oxygen does have something. They will at least help us do XProc 3 instead of just XProc 1 hard-coded in Oxygen, which is the case right now.
Good.
I don't know the schedule they have, so let's all talk to George and beg him plead.
Exactly, and maybe people notice that the XProc 3 style sheets I showed as example did not have validation errors. It's because I tricked Oxygen in accepting the XProc 3 schema instead of the XProc 1 schema, because it says, hey, what you're doing, you do a p-declare step, so it probably is an XProc 1 pipeline, but you can trick Oxygen in accepting it as an XProc 3 pipeline. You have to do some tricks. If people are interested, I can describe them, but that's probably a somewhat longer discussion.
Oh, right. Well, if there are no further questions, as I mentioned in the beginning, the very last webinar of this June will be an XProc Q&A session, and we encourage you all to have a think about questions to ask then. We're discussing submitting them before, aren't we, Eric?
Yeah, please.
Further details will be forthcoming.
Right. And there is now the question of, please let us know how you trick Oxygen. If you pull the repository again tomorrow probably, or end of tomorrow. I will put an entry in the Q&A file on how to do that.
Tell people how to trick oxygen, right?
Yeah.
Thanks, Eric.
Okay.
So thank you all very much for listening in, and thank you, Eric, very much for this presentation. The next webinar will be on Wednesday, and we'll leave XProc for that session talking about schematron messages instead. We all hope to see you there, but until then, thanks from all of us, and goodbye, and have a great evening.